I'm Jim Rimbach, president of CX Global Media and host of the Customer Service Weekly podcast powered by Pace, the official podcast of National Customer Service Week, where our purpose is to help you ignite CX celebration all year. Each episode, I meet with senior leaders from top brands as they share their story on how they recognize and lead the people and solutions that help their organizations to deliver a customer experience that separates their organization from others, so you can ignite your own CX celebration. And now, on to the show. Okay, CX Igniters, and welcome to another episode of the Customer Service Weekly podcast, which is powered by Pace. And today I'm really excited because I have Jason S. Bradshaw on the show with us. Jason, welcome.
Hey, Jim. It's so great to be on the show and to get to be with your CX Igniters.
Well, and I have to tell everybody too that for those that may not be aware, Jason is also the author of It's All About CEX, or CX for some of us. CEX is very provocative, and so that's why it's part of the title. And it's the essential guide for customer and employee experience. And for those of you who've also become listeners or are listeners of the Fast Leader Show podcast, we're also going to have Jason on the show to go more in depth in his book. But for this particular show, we really want to focus in on how really they're going about celebrating those people who are delivering the experience, on the front line at Volkswagen Australia. So Jason, if you could share a little bit about your role with Volkswagen Australia, as well as a little bit about your background in the industry. And I'd love for you to throw in some other areas that you feel are also important, because I know you have an extensive background with a couple different things.
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Customer and Marketing Officer for Volkswagen Group Australia. And that is a really unusual role because you might not automatically think that I'm responsible for network training and development, for example. You probably think I'm going to be responsible for the contact center and advertising and things like that. And of course I am, but I have a very wide remit, and it includes things like network training and development, CRM systems, and digital transformation, amongst other things. But my journey, I didn't wake up one day and become the Chief Customer and Marketing Officer for Volkswagen Group Australia. I've also worked for brands like Target as their head of customer. I spent 3 years working for a large Australian government organisation. And I always say I learned a lot about what motivates me by spending 3 years in government. I'm not sure I'm going to head back there, but I certainly did learn a lot there. And I've worked in telecommunications. In fact, I've worked in 7 different industries throughout my career, as well as being a small business owner and entrepreneur. If your guests have picked up a copy of the book, they would already know that at the age of 14, I started my very first business. So, when I was interviewed at 14, I talked about the power of customer service. So, I'm not 14 anymore, but I still think that it's one of the most essential parts of growing and sustaining a business.
Well, I think, and we definitely go into that story on the Fast Leader Show. We will. And so I do find that even at that young age, you were essentially putting in customer experience, elements, pillars, practices, and didn't even call it that. I mean, to you it was service and the importance of service, but then you talked about how it permeated throughout your entire business.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I can remember saying that I can't compete on price, but I can compete on service. And I would be there for the customer. I would respond in a timely manner. And here we are some 20 odd years later. And, there's a number of books out there talking about the power of being more convenient or removing friction and making things easier. And I think the fundamentals are never going to go away. Our job when it comes to customers is about being as simple and as easy as possible to do business with. But of course, businesses get very distracted by the safety nets of process and policy, as opposed to looking at how they can serve their customers and then building processes and systems behind to support that goal, as opposed to the other way around.
I do think, though, that your evolution and the role that you're currently playing now with Volkswagen Group Australia is something that I do see it being more common in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you start talking about being customer centric, well, it is. It's the marketing aspects. It's the employee development aspects. It's the customer engagement aspects. It's the, going out and finding customers who haven't experienced the Volkswagen brand before. I mean, it's all of those elements coming together. And that's what comes together under your particular realm of responsibilities. So if you start looking and thinking about your responsibilities and role, how do you see some of the peers that you may be working with and how you see that elevation going to the uppermost levels of the organization? How do you kind of see that right now?
Well, interestingly, a lot of the chief marketing officers around the globe are talking about wanting a seat at the table. They want to be at the board table. Well, as chief customer officer, so before I had the marketing component, I was already at the board level. So here in Australia, I sit on the board of the Australian organisation. And, that's not dissimilar in a number of large organisations. The chief customer officer is, quite often on the boards of these organisations now because, perhaps because it's seen to be the right thing to do, perhaps because there's a genuine commitment to it. But I think ultimately it's because customers are at the heart of everything we do. And that's a real challenge that I think organisations are going through at the moment is, is it the chief customer officers, is that the role that should leave the marketing department? When at Volkswagen, the market here in Australia, there used to be a general manager of marketing and I was the chief customer officer and we reported into the same person, but we had, different seniority and different responsibilities. And then ultimately that role became part of my responsibilities as chief customer and marketing officer. And I always look at it this way. And I've been advocating for years that the chief customer officer should lead marketing. And there's great marketers out there. This is not a slight on any of them, but marketing's job is to basically create desire for a promise. And enough desire for that promise that people turn that desire into action called buying the product or service. Customer experience or customer service, whatever you want to call it in your organization, their job is to make sure that the promise is delivered, or when it's not, that they smooth things over. So if those two parts of the organizations aren't bolted together, if they aren't intertwined, what I find happening time and time again, and I've experienced this in many organizations, is that the marketing team go out and make, with all good intentions, promises that ultimately are not deliverable. And then you have contact centers that are swamped, or customer service teams that are swamped, or account managers that are swamped with managing the expectation that wasn't delivered on. And so I advocate very strongly that by having the chief customer officer ultimately leading those two parts of the business, for them to be successful, they have to have those two parts of their division to be absolutely in harmony together.
Well, and with that harmony, and as well as with the execution point, I mean, you are a very strong advocate of the employee experience. And when we start talking about, delivering and sustaining, a customer experience, that's a core element. And that's why you have it in the book. And obviously, history, you believe in that so much. And so we talk about the celebration of Customer Service Week because its original intent is about appreciating the folks that are actually delivering the experience. So National Customer Service Week, International Customer Service Week, Customer Service Week, they all have the same origins. And so if you could, I know you celebrate it, if you could share us a little bit about how you go about celebrating Customer Service Week.
Sure. So, it's a bit like Thanksgiving. It's great that we have a day like Thanksgiving where we take time to pause and give thanks, but we really should do that every day of the week, right? And or every day of the year. And so what I have launched at Volkswagen Group Australia is CX week, customer service week is not a week that we focus and then we move away on the employee. So what we actually do is once a week, every week, we have what we call our WOW Award. And that's where we recognize between 1 and 5 people across our network of independent franchise dealerships. Those individuals where the customer has said that this person is a hero. Now, we don't recognize everybody every week because there'd be more than 5, but we look at all the stories of the customers that are raving fans of who served them and take those and find the best 1 to 5 each week. So we've built a habit, if you like, of celebrating and amplifying best practice every single week. Now, what we actually do during Customer Service Week, Customer CX Week, is we have a program of reigniting our focus on customer employee experience. So we over a 5-day period, we do an online webinar where we each day drop some information with thought leaders to help our leaders be better at serving their teams, their customers for the entire year. And we weave into that, of course, celebrating these WOW Award winners throughout the year. So for me, it's really important to have that discipline of celebrating your employees routinely, not just once a year.
I mean, I love that. I mean, because we talk about how do you carry forth the spirit, all week long or all year long so that people know that it's front and center for the organization. And then therefore, we often can have reminders of, congruency and commitment and, unwavering, all of those things that, really make the impact of the messaging ring true. Because I think one of the biggest things that we often find is a gap. In other words, well, I know what you want me to do and what you're saying we're supposed to do, but then I have all these other things in the way that are preventing me from doing it, which could be more cards, and it goes on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
Some of those practices or, just things that we use to handcuff folks. So, I mean, I love that you're continually reinforcing that. However, I'm sure there's instances and times where that didn't occur. Like you thought something was going to work and help you to carry it all year long, but it kind of backfires. Or something that kind of stands out for you. It's like, probably should have done that.
Well, I think that I wouldn't go down to the backfire. I wouldn't think that it necessarily backfired, but there's certainly been initiatives that have been unsustainable. You go, oh, this is a great idea. And then 6 months in, you're like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've created a rod for my own back. And one of those is what I call or what is a thank you postcard. So I've done this at multiple organizations. I'd have custom postcards made up that represented what our core customer experience promises were to be embedded in them, and all the traditional elements that you'd also have on a postcard. And if you worked for me, Jim, and something came across my desk and you had done a fantastic job, if I thought it was really fantastic, I'd grab one of those postcards and I would write a note on it and literally post it to you so that you had the joy of getting it in the mail and that recognition piece. And in different companies, I've done it in different ways. So in some companies, they were my postcards and it was my stamp of recognition. In other organizations, the postcards would be available for anyone that wanted to send a thank you or a recognition to an employee. When I came to Volkswagen, I'm like, well, we've got to amp this up. In my division never used to exist when I went to Volkswagen, and so the first few months, my budget was slightly better than mac and cheese, but it wasn't very big, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to amp up this thank you recognition postcard thing, and every week I'm going to send a thank you card to anyone that had, say, a 10 out of 10 in their Net Promoter Score. Well, the first week that was fine. Second week, still fine. By the third or fourth week, I'm spending all Sunday writing cards to people, and I know that they couldn't read them. By the end of the day, my handwriting was shot, and it just was not sustainable. And then you get into Oh, well, no, this person doesn't deserve one. I don't agree with those comments. And you start putting a filter over what started very innocently as reinforcing messages from customers. And so, I think that great ideas need to be sustainable. You should always try them, but shouldn't be afraid to step away and go, okay, this is not sustainable. And it was for a season, and let's move on. And that's where the Friday wow stories come in. Now, selecting 1 to 5 people out of hundreds is a lot easier than writing 100 thank you cards.
Well, I mean, that's a great story to share, because I think you're right. I mean, what can we realistically execute? And I think you also bring up something that comes to mind for me, because it's one of the things that's always been, especially in the voice of the customer world, something that has been, let's just say, an issue when it comes to the industry of automotive. And that is, the whole net promoter and survey and the incentives and all of that wrapped around it. And, it's easy, at least in the States, they talk about, gaming the system.
Mm-hmm.
We've all, here, at least for me, who've had service specifically, on their vehicle, would get the survey and says, hey, you're getting ready to receive a survey, and it's really important for my family and my organization that I get a 10. Please let me know if there's anything that I haven't done that's going to prevent you from giving me a 10, because I need to have a 10.
Yeah.
So that's something you've had to address there for a Volkswagen Group in Australia as well. I mean, or
absolutely, Jim, and it happens in all industries. I was asked by one of my suppliers to give feedback for like a JD Power or a Magic Quadrant, something or the other, and they said, oh, we need to have a pre-call. I'm like, sure, okay. In that pre-call, and this is a major B2B organization. In that pre-call, they said, now, is there anything that's going to prevent you from giving me 5 stars? Or like giving the organization 5 stars? I was absolutely floored. And my head of customer insights was on the call as well. And he just looked at me and said, like, we both were in disbelief. But, the auto industry absolutely is notorious for, oh, Jim, if you don't give me 5 out of 5, my family's not going to eat. Or, even worse, you give them 1 out of 5 because they just didn't do a good job. And then they ring you and go, why the hell did you do this? And, abuse you. And so that was something that I couldn't accept. Fundamentally, I think feedback, good or bad, whether it's a good score or a bad score, is a gift. It tells you something. And so one of the things that I did at Volkswagen Group Australia was to remove all bonusing attached to the score. So I've talked about this publicly. We used to spend about $10 million a year on bonuses for dealerships getting a particular score. And now, not every dealership would meet those targets, right? But $10 million a year. Now, here in Australia, there's about 100 Volkswagen dealerships. So that's in context, that's a lot of money for that number of dealerships. And I took it away, and I did not replace it with anything else. That money just went off the table, and our scores went up. Now, I didn't take it away on day one. I layered a range of programs in place over years to build skills and commitment and capability and a genuine focus on CX. But when we took it away, of course, there was people up in arms about it. How dare you take away this money that, ultimately they were putting on the bottom line. But nonetheless, we did that and our scores went up. Now, I think that reinforces that if you have the culture and you have the approach right, the bonus is not the motivator that's getting you those results. Because at the end, and Forrester's done a whole pile of research on this where they also agree with me, paying bonuses for a behavior doesn't actually generate the behavior. It might in the very first couple of months, but definitely not over the sustained period. And so we took that away. And the interesting stat is that those dealerships that meet both our employee and customer experience targets, because we do have targets, but those that meet it make on average double the profit of those dealerships that don't meet both those targets. And that's without us paying a bonus. So, I would say that any organization that is paying a bonus to get a behavior, especially when it comes to customer employees experience, that you need to start building a pathway to get out of that bonus rat wheel, because there is no winning. It's not driving better behaviors, and it becomes in many instances the motivator for negative behaviors. So, Jim, I cannot feed the family tonight if you don't give me a 10 out of 10. That is not a good customer experience.
Yeah, I don't think, trying to apply guilt is ever going to amount to a good thing.
No. And then think about your program. How can you improve if all your scores are false?
Yeah, and I think, you saying how your scores went up is really, the ultimate, validation in doing what you're doing. So thank you for sharing that story. Now, when I start thinking about significant impacts, though, is, not everything is equal, right? So if I'm talking about employee experience, I'm talking about customer experience, I'm talking about taking away the incentive, I'm talking about reinforcing every single day of the week, all of those types of things, there's got to be something that's like, okay, based on, the things that we've done and what we're doing, this has to stay. I mean, so what do you think is one of your main drivers?
So I often get challenged by this, especially when I'm giving a keynote to CX professionals. But think about your favorite movie. For me growing up, one of my favorite movies was the movie Speed. And when I think about that movie, I think about Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves, on the bus, and they can't go below a certain speed. Many of your listeners would be familiar, hopefully, with the movie, or I'm just showing how old I am. And when you take a step back, the things that I'm remembering about that movie are all delivered by the employee. Sandra is an employee of the production team. The people that produced, wrote, and directed that movie, they're the organization. It's the employee, in this case, Sandra Bullock, that I'm remembering. And so if you don't know where to start or where to have the biggest impact, that should be the key. And the key, to make it really obvious, is start with the employee experience. Because if they're having an experience that engages with them and gains their commitment and buy-in to organizational success, then that has no other chance but to actually impact the customer experience. Because when they get that call at 4:59 and they're meant to be out the door at 5 o'clock, if their experience is a positive one, if they're committed to the organizational success, they take that call at 4:59 and they deliver a solution to the customer, as opposed to, I'm there for the paycheck, and at 4:59 I'll just let the call ring out. They'll think that they rang after we closed our phone lines. And so I say that you have to start with the employee in mind, the employee experience. And I believe that every employee comes to work to be successful. So what can it be? What can we do to help that employee be really successful? And so in that employee experience space, it's define what success looks like, and then invest in giving them skills and reinforcing those skills and building on those skills that will help them deliver that sort of success, whatever you've defined it as. So, if you say you're going to be the easiest company in the world to do business with, but then you give your employees 500 steps to every process, then the two aren't in line with each other. And so if you're thinking about the employee experience, you would go, well, we say we're going to, do X in 24 hours. They can't, the process can't take 36 hours to do it, because that's just implied pressure immediately. So I say, look at the employee experience and think genuinely around how you can help them be more successful, because their success will become the organization's success.
Well, along with those lines, I mean, there's so many moving parts to all this, and you talked about the equation. And so, a lot of people may think that, well, it's actually a best practice, to incentivize, the behavior that you want. You should, provide those types of things. And so you just proved that it's not. So there's a lot of myths and misconceptions that's wrapped around delivering the customer experience. And so you talked about the one as far as the incentives are concerned. Is there another one that stands out to you from the customer side?
So, so for me, it's about making absolutely crystal clear what your company, whether it be for your employee or for your customers, what your company promises and what it stands by. So, you can be a Motel 6 and have customers. You don't have to be the Ritz-Carlton, the JW Marriott to get customers into your hotel. But if you have to be consistent and you have to deliver on that promise. And so I think for both customers and employees, you have to define what it is that your company is absolutely going to be famous for. Now, I quite often ask leaders, what do you want to be famous for? And they're like, I'm not in the movies. But what do you want to be famous for? And then stick by it. Make it consistent. Make it easy for your team members to deliver on that, and have a feedback process. And this is really key, have a feedback process in place that you action on. So, I would argue that there's no company in the world, or very few in the world, that are going to stop asking, on a scale of 1 to 5 or a scale of 1 to 10, how great I am. But what I would encourage organizations to do is not to share that number on a daily basis, but share the verbatim comments, as quickly as you possibly can. Because if you have people focused on what customers are saying as opposed to the score, then they will start working to fix what's wrong and celebrate the wins, as opposed to being fixated on this number. A customer experience score, an employee experience score, is not something you put in the bank. It's not cash. It's what people are saying that ultimately should be driving your behavior, not a score, especially if you've got bonuses in place. Because I've seen people give a 10 out of 10, whether it be on an employee survey or at a customer experience survey, and then you read the comments and you're like, how on earth did these people give a 10 out of 10? They just said that they had the most terrible experience of their lives. And it comes back to the fact that, Jim, if you don't give me a 10 out of 10, I can't feed my family tonight. So I would say that the, top 3 activity that you can do, define your promise and stand by it. Be focused on building processes and systems that enable people to deliver on that promise. And number 2, it's share the comments that customers and employees are leaving about their experience to inform improvements. And that 3rd step, of course, is doing improvements. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be 10% improvement every day. A constant focus on 1% improvement is all it takes to differentiate yourself.
Well, as you're talking, so for me, I've heard people push back and say, managing qualitative data and qualitative information is a significant investment. I mean, it takes a lot of resources. And so for me, I would dare to say that, based on what you were saying, is, one of the myths is thinking that not, collecting and managing and distributing and leveraging your qualitative information, doesn't have a significant ROI.
Well, I go back to my experience, and in every organization that I've worked in, I've managed to increase revenue and reduce costs while having an absolute commitment to the qualitative data from consumers. And you don't have to, it's like journey mapping in my mind. You don't have to have everything documented to be able to move forward. You don't have to see every element of it. Okay, you get 10,000 pieces of feedback a day. Let's go to the extreme. 10,000 pieces of verbatim comments a day. You don't have to read every one of them. If you just had a discipline that every manager in the organization had access to the feedback, and that they had to look at 3 promoters, if we want to use a net promoter type language, 3 comments from 3 promoters and comments from 3 detractors every day. If you have 1,000 people all of a sudden looking at 3 and 3 every day, then you're creating a wealth of knowledge about what is working and what is not working. And does it matter if they even looked at the same three? They're all going to put their own lived experiences over it, their own filters, their own unconscious bias, right? So, I could talk to you about, talk to the audience for hours about tools like Qualtrics and others that have AI tools that can read the comments and come up with themes and stuff. But make it simple. Give everyone access and tell them they've got to read, 3 to 6 comments a day. That's not going to add cost to your business, and it can help your business improve straight away.
Okay, well, I think those are really important points, because for me, those are two distinctions. You were talking about essentially the systemic and organizational end, if I'm using a tool to do data mining and things like that. Yeah. But then I have the human element, which is all about the execution and the understanding and the commitment and the alignment. Yeah, to me, you have to have both, don't you?
Look, absolutely. It would be remiss of me not to say that you need to have both. But you don't have to get hung up on how much, you don't need 10 data scientists to move forward, is what I'm saying. If at an organizational level, your focus and budget means that the only thing that you can afford is the organizational-wide system of record around customer and employee experience, and that you create a way for operational leaders to have access to that data in real time. I'm a big believer it needs to be in real time. Then that alone will empower improvements in the organization. As a team manager in a call center, if every day at the start of my shift, I open up my computer and I see 3 comments from people that were served from my team that loved them, and 3 comments from customers that hated my team, then in that alone, as a team manager, as long as the right organizational culture exists, I can see, oh, hang on, I know why these three things happened yesterday. I've got to change that in my team. Or, maybe I've got a more systemic problem. I talk about the need to have people that champion customer experience at every level of the organization. But as a team manager, if I'm reading that what happened yesterday, or the feedback that I got yesterday, I'm only reading a few of it, I can make changes straight away. And it could be as simple as, maybe I got the lunch breaks wrong, or maybe it was, we lost power in the building, so of course people had a bad experience. Like, it might be things you can't fix, but 9 times out of 10, probably 9.9 times out of 10, there's going to be insights that the team manager can action without needing an organizational behemoth behind it to try and come up with a fix to it.
Well, as you're talking, I start thinking about that organizational uniqueness from one to the other. It doesn't matter if I'm a low cost focused solution, or if I'm a high end. I mean, there's still, some expectations that need to be set and therefore executed upon. There's a whole lot of subtle differences, from organizations. There's some consistencies, but then it also happens in cultures. So I would really be interested to know what you feel is unique about the customer experience in Australia that others would need to know about.
So I think most people have this view that Australians are easygoing, laid back, and that can come through in the customer experience at times, especially when you're in the service industry. But what I would say is that's a persona; it's not reality. Our customers in Australia expect a very high and consistent level of service, and they're willing to forgive you when you get it wrong, but not when you get it wrong repeatedly. I'll give you a really quick example. We have Australia's largest telecommunications company. I wrote a blog about it. They're called Telstra. And many, many years ago, they outsourced, or offshored, I should say, all of their contact centers to the Philippines. Now, that's perfectly fine, commercial decision. And in fact, their customer service feedback improved over the years. So it was it was financially beneficial and experientially beneficial for them, I believe. But then the pandemic hit earlier this year. So COVID-19 hits earlier this year and completely shattered the contact center industry and disrupted the contact center industry in the Philippines. Now, people, Telstra and others at that time of when the pandemic hit here in Australia, which was March, started messaging, due to the pandemic, our service times are extended, etc. Everyone was accepting of that. Well, it's at the time of this recording, it's November, and we're just days out from December. And Telstra is still saying that their service times are delayed because of the pandemic. We're talking about an organization that makes, millions and billions of dollars every year. They have billions of dollars of revenue every year. And they can't fix the service experience in 6 months. Australians might be laid back, but they're not that laid back. And so I think that's becoming the case around the world as we become much more global. I don't measure my online buying experience based on the last time I bought from that company. I base it on the last buying experience I had and the best last one I had, right? So I think as we become much more global, whether you're in Australia or in the US or anywhere, that customers have this global expectation around what good looks like. And you can have your localized and company flavors to that. But ultimately, if you're not delivering on your promise, then they won't stick around anymore.
That's a very good point. So when you start and coming back full circle, we had talked about, you playing this dual role of marketing and customer experience, and talked about the elevation to the C level, talked about being on the boards, talked about, bringing together the systems, talked about the internal experience and external experience and an engagement associated all around that. And I would dare to say that there's a lot of folks that are saying, hey, you know what, I someday would like to have an opportunity to be in an organization where I can essentially finally, unite, the promise and the practices, like you're getting the opportunity to do. What piece of advice would you have for somebody like that?
So decide what you're going to be famous for and commit to it, because there will be an organization that wants that. And in every job I've had, I've been passionate about employees and customers, and I've taken strategic steps to always promote the benefits of doing that and demonstrate the return on investment. If you go to the CFO and you say you want to build a new IT system, then his or her first question is going to be, what's going to be the return on investment? People aren't doing that enough in the CX and EX space. You have to. It's a business. They're not there to make losses. They're there to make profits, and there's nothing wrong with that. So what's the return on the investment of the activity? And sometimes it's really difficult to articulate that. But I think that if you want to be able to grow your career, whether it be around CX or EX, you have to define what you're going to be known for, and then demonstrate the ROI that delivers over time.
Jason, I've had a great time with you today. Can you please share with the CX Igniters how they can connect with you?
Absolutely. So the best way to connect with me is my website. It's jasonsbradshaw.com. Very important to keep that S in there, jasonsbradshaw.com. I'm also Jason S. Bradshaw on all the socials, so Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. Jason S. Bradshaw. And any of your listeners that go to jasonsbradshaw.com/sign up will get the first 2 chapters of my book with my compliments for listening to me today.
Jason S. Bradshaw, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all ignite and carry forth that CX celebration all year long. Thank you for listening to the Customer Service Weekly podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, follow, and share the Customer Service Weekly podcast and register for a free membership at customerserviceweekly.org to get the latest updates on how you can help ignite the CX spirit everywhere.